The following sermon comes from the pulpit of New Plainview Baptist Church, located in Tallapoosa, Georgia. We are a community rooted in the transformative power of the gospel. Each week, we dive into the Bible's depths, discovering enduring truths and nurturing a deep-rooted faith in the gospel of Jesus Christ. We invite you to join us as together we explore the boundless depths of God's Word.
You know, it is interesting that no one has to teach you to be afraid of the dark. A couple of years ago, my family and I, we went to the Lost Sea in Tennessee. Now, the Lost Sea is a cave, and its main attraction is an underground lake. But it wasn't the lake that I remembered as much as I remembered something that Judson did. See, during the tour, the guide would eventually gather everyone together, and they would turn off all of the lights. Total darkness. The kind of darkness where you can wave your hand in front of your face and see nothing there. Judson, my youngest boy, he was about 2.5 back then, and he was up in my dad's arms. He was up in Grandpa's arms, and the very instant the cave went black, the only thing you could hear was Judson say, "Boo to you." And then it stands out to me because we never sat Judson down and said, "The dark is scary." But he knew. He knew that the moment the lights went out, that was his opportunity to give Grandpa a fright. He came that way. And we all come that way. The dread of the dark is not something you pick up along the way. It's installed into you. And here's the thing, you never really outgrow it. You just become better at hiding it. You put a grown man in a dark parking deck, and all of a sudden, the keys are in the hand, ready to go. You're looking at the spaces between the cars. You're looking in the corners because it is installed into us, the fear of the dark. And as you get older, it just puts up grown-up clothes on. But church, the cave is the easy kind of darkness. Because in the cave, the guide always turns the light back on. You blink, your eyes adjust, you walk out into the daylight, and on the way to the car, you buy a postcard. But you see, there's another kind of darkness that is even more ominous. A darkness that you cannot buy a postcard on your way out the door. It's the layoff and the drive home in the middle of the afternoon as you try to figure out what you're going to say to your family. It's the diagnosis and the words that the doctors say to you that splits your life into a before and an after. It is the grief that will not lift, that is just as heavy the second year as it was the second day. The darkness that you cannot flip on a switch, that you cannot outrun. The darkness that you just find yourself in the middle of. And church, that kind of darkness is the darkness we look at in our text, where a man says something incredible. If you have your Bible with you, I would invite you to open with me to Psalm 23. Last week, we started this short series through Psalm 23, and we said there are 3 pictures here from David. The first was found in verses 1 through 3, where we see the Lord as the shepherd and us as his sheep. In verse 4, we see the Lord as a companion who walks beside us. In verse 5 and 6, the Lord as a host who welcomes us into his house. A shepherd, a companion, and a host. And in each one of those pictures, David makes a confession. He says, "I shall not want." And last week we saw that meant, I shall not lack a single good thing. Next he says, "I will fear no evil." And then next week we will see, he declares, "I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever." Last week we met the shepherd, and we heard that good confession, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." And this morning we tackled the second one, "I will fear no evil." If you are able to stand, I would invite you to do so as we honor the reading of God's word. And we look at our text, as we read the full chapter as we did last week. Our chapter, it says this, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. This ends the reading of God's word this morning. The grass withers, the flower fades, but the word of our God will remain forever. You may be seated. Now this morning, as we come to our text, we come, like I said, to verse 4. And there's something I want you to notice right away. Last week, we spoke of green pastures and still waters. And at the end of the Psalms, we speak of dwelling in the house of the Lord forever, seated at a table with a cup that is overflowing. But I want you to notice that it is right here, when David is in his lowest, darkest place of this entire chapter, he is talking about walking through the valley of the shadow of death, and it is here that he is able to say, I will fear no evil. And he's not able to say this because he has nothing to fear. He's not able to say this because there's not an actual threat in the dark, but he's able to say this because who is with him in the dark. And that brings us to our main idea this morning. The main idea I would like you to take away from our text this morning is simply this: to have the Lord as your companion is to have nothing to fear, even in the darkest of valleys. And I want us to see that truth from our text using two main movements, two main ideas. And the first is this: we must see the confession that David makes in the valley. The confession in the valley. Look with me again at the beginning of verse 4. There David says, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. Now we have to stop there, because when we hear that phrase, the valley of the shadow of death, if you're anything like me, a picture comes to your mind. And the picture that likely comes to our mind is the funeral. It's a hospital room where the machines have gone quiet. That's where we have filed this verse away. This is the one that we read at the graveside. It's the one that we save for the very end. And it is a comfort there, and it should be. This is a verse for comfort to those who are passing from death to life. But if we file this only away from a funeral verse, we have missed that this verse is not only for the dying, it is also for the living. And so I want you to look closely at what David actually writes here. Because yes, he is speaking of death, but notice in our text that he does not say that he is passing through the valley of death, but the valley of the shadow of death. And those are not the same thing. You see, a shadow is not the thing itself, but a shadow is something the thing cast out in front of it. And we all know that death casts a very long shadow. From the moment you are born, you are walking in the shadow of death. You do not have to wait to the last hour of your life to feel it in this world. You feel it every time the world breaks. You feel it after every illness and every loss. You feel it after every goodbye you did not want to say. And every good that did not last long enough, and every grief that has lasted way too long. The shadow of death touches us in our ordinary days. Yes, most of the time the sun is up so high that the shadow is blanked out by the sun. But then there are times that the valleys come, and the shadow stretches out across your road, and there's no way but through. And that is what David is referring to. He's not just referring to dying, he's referring to living. For those stretches of darkness over your ordinary life. It's for the pain that's been so long that you can barely remember what it's like to live without it. It's for the grief that was supposed to lift by now, but hasn't. It's for the despair that has made you almost stop expecting anything to change. These are the valleys that we walk through in this life. But it is worse than that. Because you see, these valleys, they are not empty. There's something in the valley of the shadow of death. There's something down there with you, and it is a danger to you. When you cannot see your way out, when the pain will not stop, when the circumstances are so overwhelming for so long, and you do not know which way to turn, there's a voice in the dark that begins to speak. And he says to you, he's not coming. He says you've prayed about this for years and nothing has changed. Maybe you have been a fool for trusting him in the first place. It says to you, give up. The pain is too real. There's no use in going any further. That is the valley of the shadow of death. That is the evil that is in the darkness. And it's not only that you may lose your health or lose your job or lose someone that you love, but down there in the pit, the darkness begins to work on your faith. It whispers in your ear the same thing that was whispered in Job's ear by his wife, curse God and die. That is where David is. We must understand that. He is blinded in the dark. He is hunted in the valley, and he cannot see which way to go. And it is here that David opens his mouth and he speaks. And he does not say, I am holding on by a fingernail. He doesn't say, I think everything will be okay. But even here in the deepest, darkest valley, he says, I will fear no evil. And he does so, not because he sees the light, not because he sees the end of the tunnel. He's down in the pit. And so we ask, how can he make such a statement? How can someone in such a dark valley say, I will fear no evil? I will not be afraid. Well, church, David doesn't leave us wondering, but he gives us the answer in his very next breath. That brings us to our second heading this morning. After seeing the confession in the valley, we must now turn and look at the companion himself. The companion in the valley. Look with me again to verse 4. There again, David says, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. That's the whole reason. He will not fear the dark because he is not alone in the dark. He has a companion, and that changes the calculations altogether. You even see it in the language that he uses in our text this morning. Notice what happens to the words themselves, because something changes right here, and it is so easy to pass it by. Think about the way David has been talking. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He's saying he. David has been talking about God. He's been describing him as you would describe someone who means something to you, to a friend. But the moment the lights go out, the moment the past drops down into the valley, the word changes. He doesn't say, he is with me, but he says, you are with me. Right there in the blackest part of this psalm, David stops talking about God and he starts talking to God. The description is over, and now he is clinging on to him. And church, do not miss that. The darkest place of this psalm is the most intimate place of this psalm. It is in the valley, not in the green pastures, that David stops describing his shepherd and he reaches out and takes hold of him. The darkness doesn't drive David away from God, it drives David to God, into his arms. But the comfort doesn't just come for David not being lonely down there in the dark. The comfort doesn't come just because he has a companion to make the darkness less empty. That's not it. Because a companion who is just as lost as you are, a companion who is just as blind as you are, just as helpless, that's no help at all. That's no comfort at all. That's just one more person stumbling around in the dark with you. Two people lost instead of one. Think back to Tennessee. Think back to that lost sea. The lights have been cut out. The darkness is so total, you don't know there's anyone else in the room. Remember what Judson did. He said, boo. A little boy in the deepest darkness there is, and he is playing. He is laughing. He's making a game of it. Now, church, ask yourself, why? Why is he not screaming? Why is there not the dread that is installed in him? Why is it not flowing out? Why? I'll tell you why. He was in the arms of his grandfather. And that made all the difference to the little boy. It was the only reason. If my father would have sat that boy on the floor, the boo would have died in his throat. The game would have been over. The laughing would have stopped. It would have been terror. Nothing about the darkness changed. His position changed. There was one holding him. And here's the thing. Judson's comfort was not just because there was another person in the room. There was 30 other people in that room, and they did him no good. What did him good is to know there was someone in the room that had a hold of him that could do something about the darkness. That is what he was trusting. And so when David says, "You are with me," he's not just saying he has company in the valley, but he's saying, I am being held by someone who can do something about this darkness. And that's exactly why David doesn't stop in the middle of verse 4. He doesn't just say, "You are with me," and leave it there. Because the next question that comes is, what can this companion actually do? And David answers that for us as well. In fact, his answer begins before our passage even starts. Go back with me at verse 3. Because the first thing David tells you about your companion, the one who is with us, he actually tells us before we ever enter the valley. At the end of verse 3, he says, "He leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake." Last week we said paths of righteousness there. If you were to literally translate that, it means the right paths. It means the paths that lead to life, the paths that lead to my good. That is where the shepherd leads his people. And you must understand that that leading doesn't stop when we drop down into verse 4. You know, it is easy in the middle of the valleys of our life to feel like we have been abandoned, to lose sight of our companion. And David is telling us that our companion, he is the one who is going ahead. He is leading the way. He walks the path first. When your life drops off into the ravine, when it goes down into the cuts of the rock where the sun doesn't reach the floor, David tells us this morning, the companion, he doesn't stop at the mouth and say, "Keep going." He doesn't stop and say, "Good luck, I hope you make it through the other side." But he leads the way. He is walking point. The same shepherd who leads beside still waters is the shepherd who leads down into the dark valleys. And that changes the way we face those valleys. It means when you go through them in this life, it is not random. It means when your life descends down into darkness, it is not bad luck. He is the one who has led me here. Even the valley is his valley. The darkness is his darkness. He owns it. He knows the edges. There's nothing loose in there. There's nothing wild. There's nothing that he did not allow. And church, that brings comfort. It means that you may not understand why he has led you in this valley, but the darkness is never for a second out of control. It means that the one who brought me into this valley, the one who is in control of the valley, is the one who we've said for the last 2 weeks is too wise to ever make a mistake and too loving to ever do you harm. It means, yes, it may be dark. And yes, it may be painful, but I can trust even in the midst of it that he is still working even in the valley for my good and for his glory. I can trust that even when I cannot see it in the dark. In fact, there's even more here, and it is still sweeter. Because not only did my companion lead me down here, not only does he know the way through the valley, but he has been here before himself. And not a lesser valley, but he's walked to the very bottom of the darkest possible pit, the darkest one there have ever been. And church, do you know what psalm comes before this one? Do you know how it starts? Psalm 22. Flip over. Read it. It begins this way. My God, Why have you forsaken me? You see, those are not just the words of David, but we know those are the words that Jesus cried out while he was walking through his deepest valley, while he was on the cross. The Son of God, who never once from all eternity had been outside of his Father's presence, there in his darkest valley reached out and there was no hand. He was forsaken. Psalm 22, Jesus is abandoned in the dark so that in Psalm 23, you and I can say with David, I shall not fear, for you are with me. The only reason that we can walk the valley in confidence is because we know we will have a companion because he was forsaken for us so that we would never be forsaken. And so we see our companion. He's with us. He knows the way. But David is still not. Because it's one thing to have a guide in the darkness. It's one thing to have someone who knows where he is going, but it's a whole another thing to have a companion who is prepared to get you home safely. And so David tells us one more thing about our companion. Thirdly, in our text, we see that he is armed for the journey. Look with me at the end of the verse. David says, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. Church, in the dark valley, there are real threats. And David tells you this morning that your companion, he is ready for each and every one of them. He carries two things. He carries a rod and a staff. And he brings them along the journey because he knows. He brings the rod because he knows there are enemies out there. And the rod was the shepherd's weapon of choice. It was a club. In ancient times, the practice was to dig up a root ball, cut off the tree, and have a war club that they would drive nails through it to make a makeshift mace. They would go to war with that mace. If a lion or a wolf or a thief in the night came up against the flock, the shepherd did not run, but he would grab a hold of his club and he would move into the sound. He would put himself between the sheep and whatever wanted the sheep. He went to war. David, the man who wrote this psalm, was a shepherd before he was a king, and he tells stories of what he did as a shepherd. When he's talking to King Saul and he's about to face Goliath, David would say, the lion came and he took off one of the lambs of the flock, and David went after it and struck it and killed it with his own hand. That is the rod. The shepherd who carried it was willing to do violence to remove the threats against the sheep. But David also says his companion carries a staff. And he brings the staff because he knows the threats are not only out there, the threats are in here. That we wander and that we stray. You see, the staff was a different thing altogether. It wasn't ever a weapon, but it was a long stick with a hook on it so the shepherd could guide the way. So the shepherd could pull the sheep off the ledge. So the shepherd could direct it on which way it was to go. You see, the shepherd, long before he ever entered the valley, he knew exactly what he needed. He brought the hook, he brought the staff, not hoping that he would not use it, but knowing each and every one of us that he would necessarily need it. He knew before the wrong step was taken, before the wandering began, that he would have to keep the sheep from straying from the path. And church, if we are honest with ourselves, we like the idea of a rod. We like the idea of our God going to war for us and removing our enemies. But the staff is something we're not so sure about. Because you see, the staff is pointed at us. The staff is that closed door. It is that thing that you've wanted with everything that you have, but you haven't received. It is the hand that holds you back. It is the thing that brings you back to the path when you're trying to stray from the darkness by any means necessary. And in the moment, the staff doesn't feel like comfort at all. It feels like a no. But David here in our text, he puts the two things together. And he says, your rod and your staff, they both comfort me. Because the same hook that frustrates you is the very thing that keeps you from going over the edge in the dark. The no is not God keeping something good from you. The no is God refusing to lose you along the way. And church, that is the comfort of the rod and the staff. It is not a promise that this valley is going to be short. It's not a promise that the wolves will stop howling, or that the path in the valley will not be treacherous. The pain may not stop. The voice may come back tonight and the night after. That is not the comfort that is promised in our text. But the comfort that is promised in our text is that your companion will see you through all the way to the end. The wolf is not going to get you, and he is not going to let you wander away in the dark. Hear me, church. Everything in that deep, dark valley that has arrayed itself against your faith, the thing hunting you from the outside, and everything within that is dragging you away from the path, it is all going to fail. And it's not because you're strong enough. You're not, and you never will be. But it is because he who sees you through is strong enough. Listen to the words of Jesus himself. My sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me, and I give them not temporary life, but eternal life, and they will never perish, and no one will snatch them out of my hand. That is the reason you are still standing. It is not your grip on him or the strength of your grip on him. It is the strength of his grip on you. He is armed. He is able. And he will see you through all the way to the end. And that is why David can say, even in the middle of the darkest darkness, I will fear no evil. Not because he is strong, but because his companion is. And this companion does not lead you into the valley to keep you in the valley. He does not lead you there to keep you there. However long the valley feels, there's something else that we see in our text. The valley is not endless. Look at our text again. David says, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, through it, there's an end to this. And the same shepherd who walks you into the valley is going to see you come out the other side. Now hear me, I am not saying that your diagnosis is going to be reversed. It doesn't even mean that the pain is going to stop this side of heaven. For some of you, the far side of the valley is going to be walking through death itself. Our text does not promise a cure. But look at what our text does promise. Look again at the words that David chose. Again, he doesn't say, I walk through the valley of death. But he says, I'm walking through the valley of the shadow of death. And church, a shadow is all death is to God's people. Because 2,000 years ago, the Good Shepherd came and he walked this valley for us. And on the cross, he died the death you deserve to die. But then 3 days later, he walked out of the grave. He defeated death itself, so that now for his sheep, the only thing left of death is the shadow of it. And so when a believer comes to the end and you walk through death, you only walk through the shadow of it. Its coldness may touch your skin, but when you make it to the other side, you walk into the dawning of a day that there are no more shadows. But hear me, as I said last week, this promise, the promises of this chapter, it is not held out to every single person, but it is held out to only those who can say with David, the Lord is my shepherd, you are with me. And so I ask you plainly, once again, as I did last week, can you say that? Have you come to the point where you recognize this companion is your only hope to make it through the valleys of life? You see, there's good news, though, because even if you have not yet come to him, he still calls. the good shepherd who walked through death for you and walked out the other side, he still calls, follow me, and I will lead you through. So the call of our text is to run to him in faith. And if you are here this morning and you can make that statement David makes, that means tomorrow morning when you walk back down into that valley, you can walk it knowing that it ends. Yes, it may still be dark, and the pain may not have lifted, but you are not alone. You are not lost, and you are not abandoned in the dark. Your shepherd, your companion, he knows the way. He's armed for the journey, and he will see you safely through so that you can say with David, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me.
Thank you for joining us. To discover more about New Plainview Baptist Church, please visit us at www.plainviewchurch.online. Until next time, may the Lord bless you and keep you.